The fog that whispers Rurik's name. The fog that night was so dense it seemed to push the whole of the black eclipse back into its own silence. The sails creaked under the damp weight, and every fiber of rigging vibrated as if breathing. The crew avoided speaking loudly. Some swore they heard whispers among the waves, repeating Rurik Thorn's name like an accusation. The captain watched the sea without blinking. Despite his implacable posture, there was a rigid tension in his jaw. That fog was unnatural. The black eclipse advanced slowly, as if passing through a living veil. Sinuous shadows danced around the hull and vanished when anyone tried to look at them. A sailor said he had seen skeletal hands scraping against the wood. Rurik didn't respond to any of the speculations, but his eyes followed every murmur with lethal precision. The sea watched him back. When dawn finally broke through the mist, a disturbing discovery awaited on deck. In the center of the still damp wood, someone had carved an ancient symbol, formed by curved lines that converged like blades. Rurik knelt to examine it. He recognized that sign. It was used only by secret agents of the Kingdom of Astraeus. Spies trained to infiltrate and dismantle entire crews without being detected. This meant that terror didn't just come from the depths. It was on board. The object of desire, the living map. The captain's cabin remained shrouded in twilight as Rurik lit the lamp and revealed the most feared and revered object of the black eclipse. On the table lay a parchment sewn from irregular strips of human skin, marked by tattoos that pulsed in the light like veins filled with blood. The living map, the work of his own hands, trembled from time to time like a restless organism. Only the full moon revealed its hidden paths, but even without it, the map seemed anxious, breathing to the rhythm of the vessel. Rurik approached cautiously. Each symbol engraved there carried a story he preferred to keep buried. The tides, however, seemed to want to forcibly unearth it. Some points on the map pulsed with unusual intensity, as if something were moving to find him. The memory of the symbol left on deck grew like a knot in his mind. A spy on board meant that someone knew too much, and too much knowledge about the living map always led to bloodshed. In that stifling early morning, a slight crackling sound broke the silence of the cabin. Rurik turned around instantly, but he wasn't fast enough. The back window was ajar, and the breeze carried the smell of salt water and rust. The map had been moved a few centimeters, as if hurried hands had tried to tear it off. Cut ropes fell from the ceiling, indicating an improvised escape route. What footprints led to the exit? On the floor, a small glass vial rolled to its place at the captain's feet. Inside, a black, thick, poisonous liquid. The crew, already paranoid from the fog, began to distrust each other. Rurik analyzed everything in silence. The intruder knew where to look and what to avoid. He knew their tactics, their fears, their rituals. Perhaps he even knew the tales of the past that Rurik had condemned to the depths. Something very old was being awakened, and someone inside his own ship intended to extract every secret from him. The world in collapse, the false signature. The hold of the black eclipse reeked of musty salt and damp wood as Rurik descended the stairs. With a stomach-turning premonition, the men who awaited him were pale and motionless, as if they feared that any movement would attract something hidden in the darkness. A flickering lamp illuminated the center of the room, revealing the body stretched out among barrels and soaked ropes. The corpse, rigid and contorted, had bones marked with meticulously carved symbols, which earned Captain Rurik Thorn the nickname Bone Tattooist. Symbols that cruelly mimicked Rurik's macabre style. The bone tattooing began at the sternum and continued to the collarbones, as if the artist intended to construct his own map within the victim's flesh. The crew murmured about curse, madness, and murder. Some stared at Rurik as if expecting him to admit to the act. Others avoided his gaze, fearing to provoke his wrath. A silent accusation hung over everyone, as thick as the fog that had enveloped the ship the previous night. Rurik knelt beside the body and ran his fingers over the carvings. The imitator's cut was cold, calculated, almost reverent. A provocative gesture, a bait. Someone was trying to assume his identity, destroy his authority, and sow panic in the hearts of the crew. The spy wasn't just after the living map. He wanted to dismantle Rurik piece by piece, erode the crew's loyalty until they were enemies of each other. As he analyzed the scene, two realizations became clear. First, the victim hadn't resisted. There were no signs of a struggle. Second, the body hadn't been there since the previous night. The blood seeping through the wood was still warm. The assassin had moved just a short while ago. Very briefly. A scream echoed from the depths of the hold, and when everyone rushed to check, they found only broken ropes and a dark puddle seeping through the cracks in the floor. Two men had disappeared. The tension evaporated any order. The black eclipse had become a labyrinth of shadows, and each shadow seemed to conceal someone willing to imitate, destroy, or replace the captain himself. The overwhelming feeling of being surrounded grew. There were no threats from the horizon. They were all inside, breathing the same air as him. The revelation, the circle of dead tides. Rurik's cabin remained shrouded in a thick silence as he lit the lamp. The rocking of the black eclipse seemed heavier than night, as if the hull carried a burden no vessel should bear. On the table, something stood out from the obsessive order he maintained. A parchment folded with meticulous care, a calculated gesture, a silent summons. Rurik approached slowly, feeling the back of his neck twitch with that instinctive warning that precedes a blow. Upon opening the letter, he recognized the cipher, circular symbols intertwined with lines that moved like dam tides. The signature was the mark of an ancient sect that many considered a myth, the Circle of Dead Tides, a group dedicated to freeing maritime entities imprisoned since ages when the ocean swallowed entire islands as punishment. The text was short, precise, and each sentence seemed to have been written with the sole purpose of tearing a piece of her sanity away. The letter informed him that the infiltrator was no longer acting alone. There were others. There were ships hidden in the fog, following the black eclipse like silent predators. And there was a generous reward for Rurik's head and the living map, which the sect believed to be the final key to breaking the seal that kept the entities dormant. More disturbing than that was the last line, a phrase written in the style of Rurik's tattoos, as if someone had learned his technique to desecrate everything he represented. As he reread the message, a feeling of profound invasion took hold of him. It wasn't just a matter of espionage. It was personal. The enemy knew his rituals, his past, his moral downfall from years before. This pursuit was no accident. It was an old debt, now collected with method and patience. The crew, already shaken by the disappearances and the marked corpse, began to report nightmares, delusions. They heard sounds that didn't belong to the ship, as if the sea were whispering long-forgotten names. Men would wake up with superficial marks on their arms, as if something had scratched their skin while they slept, and each account seemed to erode what little stability remained on board. When he climbed onto the deck, Rurik saw wide eyes staring at the horizon. Ships appeared and disappeared in the fog, shapes that never came close enough to be identified. The feeling of being surrounded, previously only internal, was now total. A tightness coming from all directions, as if the entire ocean conspired to close its hands around the black eclipse. The captain took a deep breath, feeling the cold blade of the night touch his face. The war that reached him was not just against spies or traitors. There was something bigger at play, something that had been pulsing since the moment the map was created. And now, with enemies inside and out, he realized that the first flaw in his soul was already being exploited. The turning point, the storm of bones. The sky began to close in with unnatural speed, as if hungry clouds were gathering to devour the black eclipse. The wind, once constant, suddenly fell silent, leaving the sea smooth as polished stone. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the absolute silence was more threatening than any storm's roar. Warwick gripped the handrail tightly as he watched a swirling cloud, forming above the ship, something that spun with its own rhythm, oblivious to the laws of the ocean. The first impact came as a dry crack on the mast, a rigid, light, and at the same time grotesque object. When it fell onto the deck, everyone recoiled. It was a human femur, worn by time, but completely intact. Then came another, and another. In a few seconds, the sky vomited bones like hail, creating a frantic hammering that echoed throughout the hull. The sight of cadaverous bodies trying to climb the sides of the ship, pulled by invisible chains, made some men scream, others fall to their knees. Living Map reacted before anyone else. It began to pulse inside the cabin, radiating a reddish glow that pierced the closed door as if it were thin fabric. Rurik ran towards it, making his way through splinters of wood. The map writhed on the table. As if trying to escape, each tattooed symbol seemed to try to shift, rewriting directions, searching for an escape route that only it understood. It was in this chaos that the infiltrator decided to attack. Rurik barely had time to turn his body when a blade slid across his neck, cutting the skin with a thread. They fought amidst raining bones, slipping on the unstable deck. The attacker tried to push him into the sea, where skeletal silhouettes awaited with outstretched arms. The battle lasted seconds and, at the same time, seemed endless. The confrontation was interrupted when the main mast gave way with a deep crack, hurling splinters in all directions. The infiltrator disappeared on impact, swallowed by the fog and the tumult. On the ground, only an amulet with runes remained, which Rurik recognized immediately. He knew where it came from, and, worse, he knew what it meant. The discovery, the island of the drowned tombs. The storm ceased as abruptly as it had begun, as if summoned only to announce the path ahead. The living map, now weakened and marked by dark veins spreading across its surface, indicated a single destination. An island emerged through the mist, formed of black rocks so polished that they reflected the sky like blades. The tombs, aligned around the coast, seemed to breathe at slow intervals, exhaling greenish vapors that mingled with the salty air. As soon as the black eclipse anchored, the men began to hear whispers coming from the crypts without there being enough wind to carry them. Some stumbled before even stepping on the sand, victims of sudden visions. The island's ground pulsed beneath their boots, as if every meter were alive and restless. Rurik walked ahead, guided by the symbols he recognized inside the stones, ancient markings, carved with the same techniques he used to mark bones. With each step, the truth of the place was revealed. The island held neither weapons nor treasures, but a forbidden arsenal of imprisoned entities, sealed by rituals that no one should ever have touched again. The tombs were containers, not memorials. The surface vibrated with the creature's constant attempts to escape. In the center of the island, a larger crypt stood open, as if someone had vandalized it shortly before. The air inside was too thick, saturated with an energy reminiscent of the smell of burnt metal. Rurik realized they were not alone. Recent footprints surrounded the stone altar. The spy awaited him. The figure emerged from the shadows with the amulet found on the ship hanging from his neck. The glow of the runes reflected the contours of a satisfied smile. He approached the altar and began to remove the seals one by one, freeing the imprisoned entities as he advanced to capture the living map. In the infiltrator's eyes, there was something beyond betrayal. There was fervor, conviction, and behind it, a deeply personal hatred. The climax, the true betrayal. Inside the main crypt, the air felt heavier than deep water. The walls were covered in markings identical to the tattoos Rurik carved into bones. The infiltrator awaited him in the center of the hall, in the flickering light of a bluish flame emanating from the cracks in the altar. When he raised his face, Rurik recognized him, Magnus Vale, a name he believed he would never hear again. Magnus was a former crew member of the Black Eclipse, left for dead years before during an ambush. Rurik, pressured by the chaos and brutal necessity of pirate warfare, had abandoned the man to his fate. He survived, but he was not the same. Now, every gesture of Magnus carried the mark of a vengeance matured with time, pain, and conviction. He was not just a spy. He was someone who had transformed hatred into purpose. Magnus spoke in a cold, almost calm tone, describing how the kingdom of Astraeus had welcomed him, how the circle of dead tides had trained him, and how both desired to destroy Rurik. As he spoke, distorted visions began to fill the room. Rurik saw fragments of his past emerge like broken echoes, bodies falling into the sea. Hasty decisions, cruel orders he preferred to forget. The crypt amplified memories and fears, transforming them into psychological weapons. The fight between the two was as physical as it was emotional. Magnus advanced with almost ritualistic precision, as if each blow were part of a sacrifice. Rurik, wounded in the shoulders and ribs, maintained his focus even as shadows of past victims walked around them, accusing, crying, bleeding incessantly. At the height of the confrontation, Rurik managed to turn the blade against Magnus himself. The traitor fell to his knees, breathing with difficulty. Facing the captain, he offered his last words with a bitter smile, stating that Rurik had always carried within him the potential to be worse than any entity imprisoned there. He also said that the map only amplified what already existed in his soul. When silence finally filled the crypt, Rurik approached the body, removed a thin dagger, and tattooed the last symbol on Magnus's skeleton, completing a cycle he would never admit to having started. The price of betraying one's own soul. The traitor's body fell silently, as if even the island itself refused to echo his death. Rurik remained motionless for a moment. From the surrounding shadows, the entity that had ruled the forgotten territory slithered closer, assuming a form that was neither flesh nor light. Its voice whispered directly into his mind. Every man fears power until he discovers he can possess it. Surrender. Become more than blood and bone. Rurik felt the temptation pulsing. It was absolute power. It was eternal victory. It was the promise of never faltering again. The creature advanced, spreading a black glow that grazed his skin. But then he saw the living map tremble on his arm, its runes writhing as if pleading. That artifact had never been a prize. It was a prison in disguise. And as he understood this, Rurik drew his blade and said, "I choose my own hell." With a precise blow, he tore the living map. The scarred skin split open. The runes crumbled into luminous ashes, and the island vibrated like a wounded animal. Cracks opened in the ground, columns of black light exploded around, and everything began to crumble. He ran, escaping the collapsing shadows until he reached the Black Eclipse. The crew pulled him aboard as the island sank into the ocean like a swallowed secret. When Rurik raised his face, black markings snaked across his skin, pulsing as if breathing. The crew recoiled, terrified. Their captain had returned, but something had returned with him. Rurik Thorn, the bone tattooist, was no longer just a pirate. He had become something worse than any pirate had ever feared. It was the harbinger of everything that should have remained buried.